Hi, I'm Liam. Let me start my story from the point where the path of my life veered away forever. They say people reap what they sow in their hearts, but at one point in my life, I trampled over my own heart. I wanted to pay the price for a huge mistake and marry the girl whose life I had ruined, but fate turned in such a way that, without knowing it, I ended up at the altar with her sister. If you're looking for a story full of mystery and emotion, I suggest you listen to my tale until the very end. I'm 35 years old. For years, I've worked side by side with my father, Joseph, in his factory. We live a prosperous life, but in our house, my father always has the first and last word. Joseph is 55, and his only concern is maintaining our prestige and wealth. To be honest, I was supposed to marry a girl my father had chosen, a girl from a wealthy family. It wasn't that I loved her. No, it was just because my father's logic was that money should seek out money. Everything started on that cursed night. I was in a deep sleep when the ring of my mobile phone shattered the silence of the room. It was the factory security guard. With a trembling voice, he said a machine had short-circuited and part of the production hall was burning in a fire. The world collapsed on my head. My father had a heart condition, and I knew if he heard this news, he might lose his life. So, without waking him, I grabbed the keys and drove toward the factory at full speed. The sky seemed to be retaliating for all the dry years. It was raining heavily, and the road was as polished and slippery as glass. The streets were completely empty because of the rain and the late hour. Worried sick, I pressed my foot on the gas. I went through red lights one after another, just wanting to get there sooner and see what had happened to our investment. In a sharp turn, the car suddenly spun out of my control. The tires slid on the wet asphalt, and the car spun like a wild horse. I heard a violent crash, and then silence. When I got out, my body went cold. A girl named Luna, who was crossing the sidewalk, was lying on the ground soaked in blood. Her faint moans were lost in the sound of the rain. Fear ate at my soul like a parasite. I was dazed and confused. On one hand, I wanted to pick her up and take her to the hospital. On the other hand, I was afraid that if she died right there, I would be held responsible and my entire future and reputation would be destroyed. In those terrible moments, cowardice overcame me. I decided to flee, but my conscience hadn't completely shut down. Using a burner number and leaving no trace of myself, I called an ambulance and gave the address. In the car, I waited a short distance away until I saw the ambulance's rotating lights. When they picked Luna up, I followed them at a distance to find out which hospital they were taking her to. Once I was sure she went under the surgeon's knife, with a heart that felt like it was jumping out of my chest, I went to the factory. Things weren't great there either. Black smoke filled the sky, and firefighters were working hard. It took a few hours for the flames to subside, but the fire lit in my heart couldn't be extinguished by any water. I returned home safely that night, but I didn't know that girl, that accident scene, and that cowardly escape were the start of a freefall into a world where nothing is as it seems. After that hellish night, it felt like 100-kilogram weight was on my chest. I couldn't stand it and went back to the hospital. I wanted to know if that girl, Luna, had survived. But as soon as I entered the hall, seeing two police officers talking to the nurses and writing a report sent shivers down my spine. Fear took over my whole being. I thought they had surely tracked me down. Without getting any news about Luna's condition, I hurried out of the hospital and jumped into my car. I was so panicked and confused that I didn't even realize how I got home. It was like I was awake in a nightmare with no escape. The next day, with 1,000 fears, I went back to the hospital again. I found out Luna was admitted to the intensive care unit, the ICU, and was still unconscious. On the cold hallway chairs, I saw a woman crying like spring rain, whispering prayers to God for Luna to open her eyes again. From her words, I realized she was Luna's aunt. A sudden thought hit me. I had to find out where they lived. I waited for hours until finally, Luna's aunt stood up and left. Like a shadow, I followed her from a distance until she reached an old house. Now I knew exactly where the address of my sin was hidden. But on the other side of town, in the very street where the accident happened, fate was playing another game. Matthew, a 50-year-old man who owned a shop there, came early to open up when he noticed the people whispering. Everyone was talking about last night's accident. Matthew's eyes fell on the dried blood stains on the sidewalk. His heart sank. He went inside and sat down at his shop's CCTV monitor. When he rewound the footage, he saw the whole accident scene in detail. My car, the impact, and my escape. Matthew decided to tell the truth to the police. He closed the shop and headed toward the police station, but it seemed fate didn't want my hand revealed so easily. On the way, the nervous stress, or perhaps destiny, caused Matthew to have a stroke behind the wheel. His car went out of control and slammed hard into a wall. Matthew went into a coma with heavy injuries, and that evidence of the crime remained there in the dark for now. Knowing nothing about this, I locked myself in the house for fear of arrest. I didn't go to the factory for a whole week, using illness as an excuse. During that week, when I was trembling for fear of the police, Luna passed away under the hospital machines. She was gone and buried forever. Luna had a twin sister named Stella. Stella had injured her back in an accident falling down the stairs and was wheelchair-bound. They lived together, and now with Luna gone, Stella was left alone in that dark and silent world. When I finally gathered the courage and went to the hospital, I saw Luna's bed was empty. I told myself she must have been discharged and gone home. For 3 whole weeks, I went in front of their house every day and waited for hours, hoping to see Luna and ask for forgiveness. Finally, after 21 days, the door opened. Luna's aunt gently brought out a girl sitting in a wheelchair. My heart stopped. Stella looked exactly like Luna. Not knowing that Luna had passed away, seeing that girl in the wheelchair made the world collapse on my head. I said to myself, my God, I paralyzed her. Because of me, this girl can no longer stand on her feet. Guilt pierced my heart like a hot dagger. Watching those sad eyes in a wheelchair was the worst torture one could imagine for a person. Days passed, and the image of Stella in that wheelchair kept spinning in my brain like a drill. Guilt was suffocating me. I told myself, this girl can no longer stand because of my recklessness, so who would be willing to marry her? Who could make her happy? The only way I found to quiet my conscience was to pay the price myself. I decided to marry her and dedicate my whole life to her happiness, hoping that rainy night would fade a little from my memory. The first thing I did was break up with my father's best friend's daughter. I told her I had changed my mind and wanted to marry someone else. When the news reached Joseph, a storm broke out. One day while I was talking to a worker at the factory, Dad walked in like a volcano. Without introduction, he shouted to everyone, "The factory is closed. Everyone turn off the machines right now and go home." The workers were stunned, but seeing Joseph's anger, they gathered their things and left. When we were alone, a heavy silence filled the factory. I asked, "Dad, what was that for? Why did you close down?" But he just looked at me with bloodshot eyes. Finally, he lost his temper and yelled, "I heard you want to marry a poor, disabled girl? Have you lost your mind, Liam? This is madness." No matter how much he insisted I go back to that wealthy girl, I didn't budge. When he saw he couldn't win, he threatened me. "If you insist on this, there will be no wealth or inheritance. I'll take everything from you." Having lost interest in money, I said I didn't care. Dad kept his word. He took all my assets and kicked me out of the house. Now it was just me and a world of job application forms to fill so I could build my new life. I went to see Stella. In that small house, while I still thought she was Luna, I expressed my love. Stella asked in surprise, "Where did we even meet?" I lied and said I saw her in the park near their house and fell for her right there, following her to find her address. Stella, seemingly unable to believe someone would come for her in her condition, agreed to be in touch for a while. During that time, Stella was very honest with me. She showed me all the hardships of living with a disability, from moving around to the way people looked at her. She wanted to make sure I wasn't making a decision out of pity or excitement. But I became more determined every day. Eventually, I got hired as a simple clerk in a company. I who had sat behind a management desk for years, now had to work for others. It was hard, my pride was breaking, but I endured it for Stella. One day we were sitting on a park bench when my aunt called. I sent the location and she came to us. Aunt pleaded with me to go back to Dad and take over the factory again. Stella, who until that moment thought I was just an ordinary clerk, was wide-eyed hearing this. I told my aunt, I will only go back when my father accepts Stella as his daughter-in-law. After my aunt left, Stella asked in amazement, Liam, what was that all about? You were wealthy. I told her the whole truth. I told her how I gave up my father's palace and wealth to marry her, and now I had nothing. Tears welled up in Stella's eyes. Seeing that a man was willing to give up everything for her made her heart tremble, and she realized I truly loved her. But she grieved that she had caused me so much pressure. That was the moment the bond between us became stronger than ever, even though the heavy shadow of my father still loomed over our lives. Finally, Stella and I got married very simply with the meager savings I had. We started our life in Stella's small rented house. The first month was like a sweet dream. Despite all of Stella's physical hardships and limitations, we had become so attached it felt like we had known each other for years. Our love grew in that small home. Stella had told me before that she and her sister, Luna, hadn't been on good terms for years, but due to lack of money and Stella needing Luna's help with personal tasks, they were forced to be roommates. Stella was so upset with Luna that even after her death, she had gathered all her photos and given them to her aunt, so she wouldn't see Luna's face in the house. Thinking Stella was the Luna from the accident, I was relieved to hear she was on such bad terms with her sister because I was afraid that seeing Luna's photo would break my heart and expose me. That's why I never brought up Luna, so as not to upset Stella. But just when I thought I had gotten away with it, Matthew opened his eyes in the hospital. The first thing the old man did after coming out of the coma was inform the police that his shop's CCTV had recorded the moment of the accident. The police saw the footage and everything became clear as day. The license plate, my face, and that cowardly escape. They tracked me down and found out I had married the victim's twin sister. One afternoon while we were having tea, there was a loud knock at the door. Police burst in, and before I knew what was happening, cold handcuffs were locked around my wrists. Stella screamed in terror, asking, "What's going on here? What is my husband's crime?" And the police's answer exploded in that house like a bomb. "Your husband is the cause of the accident and the death of your sister, Luna." In that moment, it felt like the ground vanished beneath my feet. Stella looked at me as if she were seeing a monster for the first time. It was a strange shock. I realized I had married Luna's twin sister, and Stella realized her life partner was her sister's killer. As the officers were taking me away, I pleaded with tearful eyes, "Stella, I swear to God I love you. That accident was a fluke. I didn't want to kill Luna. Please forgive me. Let us be together again." I was taken to prison and locked behind bars. When Joseph heard the news, he rushed to see Stella. My father, seeing his son behind bars, was begging Stella to give her consent for release. But Stella was still angry with Joseph for taking away all of Liam's wealth and rights over a stubborn grudge. Although Stella was upset with me, she still loved me and wanted to both take revenge on my father and restore my rights. Stella gave Joseph a heavy proposal. She told him, "If you want Liam to be free, you must give me $500,000. Joseph, seeing that Stella's consent was the only way to save his son, was furious about this blackmail, but had no choice but to accept. He thought Stella was a money-hungry woman bargaining over her sister's blood, but he didn't know Stella had a bigger plan in mind for me. In prison, every second felt like a year. One day the cell door opened, and Joseph came to visit me. I wish he hadn't. With a sarcastic tone, he said, "See, Liam? See who that girl you stood up to me for really was." Stella agreed to give her consent in exchange for $500,000. "She's bargaining over your freedom." Hearing this was like having a bucket of ice water poured over my head. I couldn't believe the Stella I believed in so much was now making a fortune out of her sister's blood and my freedom. Meanwhile, Stella's aunt was constantly whispering in her ear, This man is Luna's killer. Don't let him go free. Leave him. In that dark cell, I was fighting both the bars and the thoughts making me cynical toward Stella. Finally, Joseph paid the money. $500,000 in cash. Stella signed the consent form and said she had no complaint regarding Luna's death. I was released from prison, but I wasn't the same person. With a broken heart and full of resentment toward Stella, I returned to my father's house. I thought Stella had taken that money to build her own life and had sold me out. A few days passed until Stella came to the factory. She called and insisted I come out to see her. At first, I refused. I didn't want to see the face of the person who had bargained over me, but she insisted so much that I finally went. When she stood there in her wheelchair by the door, I didn't even want to look into her eyes. But Stella said with her usual calm, "Liam, listen, I made a deal with your father, but not for myself. I took that $500,000 from him because it was your right. You worked in that factory for years, and your father was unfair to take everything from you. I devised this plan to get your rights back from him. This money belongs to you, not me." I froze. All those wrong assumptions I had in prison popped like bubbles. How could a fool like me have doubted an angel like her? Stella continued, "I forgave you, Liam, because I realized that accident was a fluke and you never wanted to intentionally hurt anyone. You gave up everything to make up for your mistake, and that was enough for me." I didn't know what to say out of shame. Tears came to my eyes, and I knelt before her wheelchair. Not only was I indebted to her forgiveness, but now I saw she was smarter and more selfless than I thought. Despite Joseph still looking at us with spite and opposing the union, we took each other's hands and started our life under one roof again. The Liam of now was no longer his father's yes-man vice president. With part of that same money Stella had bravely taken from Joseph, I started a shop for myself. Now I am no one's employee, and I am the boss of my own life. Every day I see Stella, I think how sometimes the price of a mistake can lead a person to a path where they find true love, a love that is much greater than money, wealth, and even old grudges.
All the stories I share on my channel are written by me, and unlike other YouTube channels, they are not copied. So I would appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe to my channel to motivate me to write new stories.